Okay, so today we're going to dive into this book you picked, Zero to One by Peter Thiel.
Yep, 0 to 1. Notes on startups or how to build the future, to give the full title.
Right, quite a mouthful. But you were basically looking for like the core principles of how to create and grow
Mm-hmm.
innovative
Mm-hmm.
companies,
hmm
right, without getting bogged down in all the business jargon.
Yeah, exactly. Just the real meat of it.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah.
So our mission for you today is like to pull out the most valuable insights from Thiel's work.
Sounds good?
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So, what struck me right off the bat was Thiel's argument that like every moment in business,
Mm-hmm.
it only happens once,
Yeah.
right? Like the next big thing won't just be a repeat of, say, a Gates or Zuckerberg.
Yeah, it's not about copying what worked before. That's not really building the future, just rehashing it.
Right, exactly. And that kind of sets up this core tension he explores
Mm-hmm.
between what he calls going from 0 to 1, which is creating something totally new,
Mm-hmm.
versus going from 1 to N, which is more like,
Yeah, scaling up or refining what's already out there.
yeah, kind of like globalization, he says. Like
Yeah.
spreading what works, but not actually coming up with something truly different.
Precisely. He really emphasizes this idea that it's that leap from 0 to 1, that act of genuine creation.
Mm-hmm.
That's what sets apart like the truly unique companies.
Yeah. He even kind of hints that blindly following the like best practices of today might actually lead you nowhere.
Yeah, he's not afraid to challenge conventional wisdom.
No, not at all. So then we get into this idea of like contrarian thinking, which Thiel's really big on.
Oh, absolutely. He's got this great question he poses. What important truth do very few people agree with you on?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember that. And he even suggests a good answer to that question often looks like.
Like taking the common belief and flipping it on its head. Most people believe X, but the truth is the opposite.
Right, exactly. It's about spotting those hidden assumptions everyone takes for granted.
Yeah, and what's so fascinating is how that question ties into understanding the future. Because for Thiel, the future isn't just what hasn't happened yet, but a time when things are going to be fundamentally different from today.
Right, and it's those contrarian truths that might actually be the early glimpses of that different future.
Exactly. It's about seeing what others don't and having the courage to act on it.
So we've got this tension between creating and copying, and this emphasis on thinking differently. Now let's dive into how Thiel actually defines progress itself. He makes a distinction between globalization and technology, right?
Absolutely. He calls globalization horizontal progress. It's about taking what works in one place and spreading it everywhere else.
Okay, got it. Like making it work on a wider scale.
Yeah, precisely. He uses China as a prime example. He says they focused on like replicating successful models from developed countries.
So less about inventing new stuff, more about adopting what's already proven.
Right. They might skip some steps along the way. He mentions how they went straight to wireless communication, skipping over landlines.
But the core idea is replication, not original creation.
Exactly.
Hmm.
Now, on the other hand, he defines technology as vertical progress.
Okay, and that's the 0 to 1 stuff, creating something brand new.
Precisely. And he's careful to point out that technology isn't just about computers or software. It's any new and better way of doing things.
Okay, so a much broader definition than we usually think of.
Yeah, exactly. It could be a new manufacturing process, a medical breakthrough, a novel way to generate energy, any innovation that fundamentally changes how we do something that lets us do more with less. That's technology.
That makes sense. And here's where it gets really interesting because Thiel has a pretty contrarian take on which type of progress is more important for the long haul.
Oh, absolutely. While most people might assume the future's all about more globalization, more interconnectedness,
Mhm.
Thiel actually argues that technology is the more vital ingredient for lasting progress.
Okay, why is that?
Well, his main point is about sustainability. He argues that if we just keep spreading existing methods without any new technological breakthroughs,
Mhm.
we're actually headed for trouble.
Okay, I can see where he's going with that.
Right. Think about it. If China just keeps expanding its energy use based on old tech, pollution's going to skyrocket.
Makes sense.
Or imagine if everyone in India wanted to live like the average American, but only using today's tools.
Yeah, the environmental impact would be huge.
Exactly. So his point is globalization without new tech in a world with finite resources just isn't sustainable.
Okay, that's a really compelling argument. So then the question becomes, where does new technology usually come from?
Right. And Thiel has some thoughts on that too. He says that new technology often springs from startups.
Okay, small, nimble companies.
Yeah, but more than just being agile, he emphasizes their ability to question established ideas
Mm-hmm.
and rethink things from scratch. He even defines a startup as the largest group you can convince of a plan to build a different future.
It's that shared vision, that boldness to challenge the status quo.
Exactly. And they often have the freedom to do that in a way that larger, more established companies don't.
Okay, so we've got the importance of creating new things and the role of startups in that process. But then Thiel throws out this seemingly kind of odd idea, the power of escaping competition
Mm-hmm.
through monopoly. Now, that sounds a little negative at first glance.
It does, because we're so conditioned to believe that competition is always a good thing.
Yeah, competition breeds innovation, right?
That's the classic thinking. But Thiel makes a really important distinction. He says that perfect competition actually destroys profits,
Mhm.
leading to this constant fight for survival where nobody really wins in the long run.
Everyone's just scrambling to stay afloat.
Exactly. And so his alternative is what he calls creative monopoly.
Okay, so not the kind that harms consumers or stifles innovation.
No, no, not at all. By monopoly, he means a company that's so incredibly good at what it does
Mhm.
that no other company can offer anything even close.
Okay, so like Google with search.
Yeah, perfect example. Or Apple when they first came out with the iPhone.
Right, that was a game changer.
Exactly. These weren't cases of illegally crushing rivals. They were about creating entirely new value for customers.
And that's what separates creative monopolies from the harmful kind.
Precisely. And Thiel argues that these monopolies actually drive progress because the potential for years, even decades, of monopoly profits
Hmm.
gives companies a huge incentive to innovate.
I see. They have the resources to invest in risky long-term projects.
Exactly. They can afford to think big and swing for the fences in a way that companies stuck in, like this constant cutthroat competition, just can't.
So in a way, it's almost like this counterintuitive argument that
Yeah.
monopolies can actually be good for consumers in the long run.
Yeah, exactly. He argues that they offer entirely new choices, creating abundance rather than scarcity.
But what about the argument that monopolies just exploit customers by jacking up prices?
Well, Thiel acknowledges that in a static world, sure, a monopolist could just become a lazy rent collector. But he stresses that we live in a dynamic world where technology is constantly evolving.
Mm.
And these creative monopolists are constantly pushing the boundaries, inventing new and better things.
So it's not just about extracting more money from the same product.
No, it's about offering better and better products and services that consumers actually want.
He even points out the inherent contradiction in the government's stance on monopolies, right?
Yeah, he talks about how, on the one hand, the government grants patents,
Mm-hmm.
which are essentially temporary monopolies to encourage innovation.
Right.
But then on the other hand, they have antitrust laws designed to break up monopolies.
So it's like this mixed message.
Yeah, exactly. It raises this question of, like, how do you find the right balance between encouraging innovation and preventing harmful market dominance?
So this idea of escaping competition really goes against our intuition, right? Like, we're taught that competition is the key to success.
It is deeply ingrained in our thinking, and Thiel even goes so far as to call competition an ideology. He argues that this belief in competition is so strong that it can actually limit us.
Really?
Yeah, he says it can trap us in this cycle of minimal profits and incremental innovation.
Instead of pushing us towards those truly groundbreaking breakthroughs.
Precisely. We're constantly told that competition is healthy, but Thiel suggests it often leads to mediocrity.
So it's like we're so focused on beating the person next to us
Yeah.
that we lose sight of the bigger picture.
Yeah, and he gives some really vivid examples of this destructive competition. Like, he talks about the fierce rivalry among top students who are all vying for those same few, like, prestigious jobs.
Like investment banking or consulting, right?
Exactly. And he argues that this intense competition can actually prevent these bright minds from pursuing truly novel ideas.
Yeah, they're so caught up in the rat race.
Hmm. And then he also talks about the, like, more direct business rivalries, like the one between Larry Ellison and Tom Siebel, which got almost comical at times.
With the ice cream trucks and everything.
Yeah, exactly. But it highlights how pointless and distracting these intense battles can become.
Okay, so sometimes competition can actually hold us back.
Yeah, that's Thiel's argument. And he also shares this really interesting story about the early days of PayPal
Mm-hmm.
and their all-out war with Elon Musk's X.com.
Yeah, that was a fierce rivalry.
It was, even to the point where one of the PayPal engineers jokingly designed a bomb.
Wow, that's intense.
It really shows you the level of, like, craziness that can arise in these hyper-competitive situations.
Yeah, it sounds like it was almost self-destructive.
It was, but luckily, that story has a good ending.
Yeah.
Because eventually, PayPal and X.com realized that joining forces was a much smarter move.
Better to work together than to keep fighting.
Exactly. And so Thiel uses that as an example of when merging can be the wiser choice.
Okay, that's interesting. But what if you can't avoid a fight?
Well, if you absolutely have to fight, his advice is pretty blunt. Fight hard and fast to end it quickly.
No point in dragging it out.
Exactly. Prolonged battles just waste resources and distract you from what really matters.
So you've either escaped competition or emerged victorious from a fight. Then what?
Right, so now it's about making sure that victory lasts.
Okay.
And that brings us to the concept of last mover advantage.
Which is kind of the opposite of the first mover advantage we often hear about?
Exactly. He's shifting the focus from just getting to a monopoly to actually keeping it for the long haul.
Okay, so how do you do that?
Well, he starts by emphasizing that a business's value today is essentially the total amount of money it will make in the future. That's why investors are often willing to pay such high prices for, like, high-growth tech companies.
Even if they're not profitable yet.
Exactly, because they're betting on those future profits.
Right, they're looking at the long game.
And that's very different from, like, a slow-growth business where most of the value is in the immediate future.
So for these tech companies, most of their value is way out in the future.
Precisely. He even uses PayPal as an example. Back in 2001, they weren't profitable yet, but most of their expected value was from profits projected 10 or more years down the line.
Wow, that's thinking long term.
It is. And to last that long and actually generate those long-term profits, Thiel says that monopolies often share certain key traits.
Yes, sir.
He lists 4: proprietary technology, network effects, economies of scale, and branding.
Okay, let's break those down.
Sure. So first, proprietary technology, which is essentially something that's really tough or impossible for others to copy. He suggests it needs to be at least 10 times better than any existing alternative to create a real monopolistic advantage.
10 times. That's a high bar.
It is, but it makes sense. You need a truly significant edge.
Right, something that sets you apart.
Yeah, like Google's search algorithms.
Yeah, or PayPal's initial ease of use on eBay.
Perfect examples. Then there's network effects.
Okay, where a product becomes more valuable, the more people use it.
Exactly. Think of it like a party. The more people who show up, the more fun it is for everyone.
And the more likely others are to join.
Precisely. So in the business world, the more users on a platform, the more attractive it becomes to new users.
Makes sense. Classic example, Facebook.
Yep, exactly. Then we have economies of scale, which is where a business actually gets stronger as it grows.
Okay, how does that work?
Well, imagine you're building a software company. The cost to create the first copy of your software might be pretty high, but the cost to create each additional copy is basically 0.
Right, because it's just digital.
Exactly. So as you grow and sell more copies, your profit margin goes way up.
Okay, so the bigger you get, the more efficient you become.
Precisely. And then finally, there's branding.
Okay, so building a strong brand.
Yeah, but Thiel actually warns against focusing on brand before having a truly great product. He uses Yahoo as an example of a company that tried to revive itself through branding,
Right.
but without actually having innovative products to back it up.
Yeah, the brand needs to be built on something real.
Exactly. So he argues that branding should come after substance, not the other way around.
Makes sense. So you've got these 4 traits that help monopolies last. Now, how do you actually achieve that lasting dominance in the first place?
Right, and this is where Thiel talks about the importance of scaling up strategically.
Okay.
Starting with a small, specific market before trying to conquer the world.
Okay, like focusing on a niche.
Exactly. And he points to Amazon as a classic example of this. Jeff Bezos' ultimate goal was to dominate all of online retail.
Right. They sell pretty much everything now.
They do, but he deliberately started with books.
Interesting.
Because it was a focused market with certain characteristics that made it ideal for online sales.
Like there's a huge variety of books, and they're relatively easy to ship.
Exactly. So only after completely dominating that initial niche did Amazon gradually expand into other areas.
Like CDs, videos, and eventually, well, everything.
Precisely. And along those lines, he has a pretty clear don't when it comes to expanding.
Don't try to disrupt the big players head on.
Okay, so avoid direct competition.
Exactly. He distinguishes between the academic definition of disruption and a more practical approach for startups.
Okay.
He argues that when you're expanding, you should actually aim to avoid direct competition as much as possible.
So find a way to coexist rather than trying to take down the giants.
Yeah, and he uses PayPal as an example of that. While PayPal did take some business from traditional payment methods,
Mm-hmm.
they ultimately grew the overall market for online payments.
So it was a net positive for everyone involved.
Exactly. They didn't just steal market share, they created new market share.
Now, this leads into the whole idea of first mover advantage, which is another commonly held belief that Thiel actually challenges.
Yeah, he's not afraid to go against the grain.
Not at all. So what's his take on that?
Well, he says that while being first can be a useful tactic,
Mm-hmm.
it's not actually the ultimate goal.
Okay.
What really matters is being the last mover.
The last mover. Yeah, the one who makes the last significant development in a particular market.
Okay, and then enjoys those long-term monopoly profits.
Exactly. And the way to get there is to dominate a small niche first
Hmm.
and then scale up strategically from there.
He even compares it to chess, right?
No, he does. He says you need to think about the end game from the very beginning.
So we've covered creating something new, escaping competition, and building a lasting monopoly. Now, Thiel shifts gears a bit and starts talking about the role of the individual
Mm-hmm.
and this age-old debate of luck versus skill in achieving success.
Yeah, that's a fascinating part of the book. He points out how many successful people often attribute their success, at least in part, to luck.
Like being in the right place at the right time.
Exactly. He mentions people like Malcolm Gladwell,
Mhm.
Warren Buffett, Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates.
Yeah, some pretty big names.
All these incredibly successful individuals who acknowledge the role of luck in their journeys.
But Thiel himself seems to lean towards a different perspective.
He does. He highlights this historical view where luck was seen as something you could actually influence
Okay, interesting.
through hard work and careful planning.
So not just random chance.
No, not entirely. He quotes Roald Amundsen, the first explorer to reach the South Pole, who said, "Victory awaits him who has everything in order, luck, people call it."
Okay, I like that.
Yeah, it's about creating your own luck through preparation and action.
Thiel's argument is that if you truly believe life is just random chance,
Mm-hmm.
then there's really no point in learning about startups or business strategy.
Exactly. Why bother putting in the effort if everything's just up to fate?
Right, if you can't influence the outcome.
So he's a big believer in taking control of your own destiny.
And that ties into his idea of having a definite view of the future as opposed to an indefinite one.
Absolutely. He argues that if you see the future as something definite,
Mm-hmm.
something you can understand and shape,
Okay.
then it makes sense to make plans and work towards them.
But if you see the future as just this big, unpredictable mess.
Yeah, then you're more likely to just give up on trying to have any real impact.
Because what's the point, right?
Exactly. So he then breaks down these views of the future into 4 categories.
Okay, let's hear him.
So first, there's definite pessimism,
Okay.
which is the belief that the future can be known and it's going to be bleak.
So, like, we know what's coming, and it's not good.
Yeah, that's definite pessimism. Interestingly, he suggests that this might actually be the prevailing view in China today.
That's interesting. Then there's indefinite pessimism.
Right, which is the belief that the future is going to be bleak but unknowable.
So we don't know what's coming, but we know it's going to be bad.
Exactly. Then we have definite optimism,
Okay.
which is the belief that the future will be better if you plan and work to make it so.
So, like, we can shape a positive future through our actions.
Precisely. He links this view to the Western world from the 17th century up to around the mid-20th century.
Okay. And lastly, there's indefinite optimism.
Right. And he describes this as kind of the default view of the baby boomer generation. Okay.
This idea that progress is just going to happen automatically without any need for specific plans.
So, like, don't worry, be happy, everything's going to work out.
Exactly. But Thiel argues that this indefinite optimism has actually led to some negative consequences.
Like what?
Well, he says it's led to a financialized world where making money becomes the primary goal.
Mm-hmm.
And to politics, that's focused on short-term gains and polls.
Rather than long-term vision.
Precisely. And he even talks about how this indefinite mindset affects our view of life and death.
Okay, how so?
He says it leads us to focus on probabilities and statistics,
Mm-hmm.
rather than actively trying to extend life and solve those big existential problems.
So it's like this acceptance of limitations rather than a push to overcome them.
Exactly.
Mhm.
And this emphasis on having a definite plan leads into his discussion of why long-term planning is so undervalued in our current world.
Which tends towards that indefinite thinking.
Precisely.
Right.
He points out how companies with clear long-term strategies are often underestimated.
He uses the example of Yahoo's offer to buy Facebook for $1 billion
Hmm?
and Mark Zuckerberg's quick rejection because he had this definite vision for Facebook's future.
That Yahoo
Yeah.
just didn't grasp.
Right. So Thiel's point is that having that clear long-term plan is incredibly powerful, especially in a world that often feels uncertain.
So it's like a compass in the chaos.
Exactly. And he concludes by saying that a startup is the largest endeavor over which you can have definite mastery.
Meaning you can actually shape its future in a very direct way.
Precisely. You have the power to make that vision a reality.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about these big picture ideas, but Thiel also gets into some more specific aspects of how startups operate. One of those is his discussion of how venture capital works, and in particular this idea of a power law.
Yeah, the power law is a fascinating concept.
So what's the key takeaway there?
Well, the basic idea is that in venture capital, a very small number of companies achieve massively greater value than all the others combined.
Okay, so it's not a linear distribution.
No, it's heavily skewed. It's not about hitting singles and doubles. It's about that one grand slam that dwarfs everything else.
So even the venture capitalists themselves might underestimate just how successful those outlier companies will become.
Exactly. While they know some investments will do better than others, they often don't fully grasp the sheer scale of the difference that the power law dictates.
So they're looking for those few companies with the potential to be absolutely huge.
Precisely. And this power law actually has some interesting implications for individuals as well.
Okay, how so?
Well, Thiel suggests that if you understand the power law, you might actually be more successful joining a rapidly growing best company.
Rather than starting your own venture.
Yeah, because even a small piece of a massively successful company can be worth far more than 100% of something that never really takes off.
So it's like ride the wave of someone else's success.
Exactly. If you can identify those future giants early on, joining them can be a much better bet than going it alone.
Okay, that's a really interesting perspective. Now, one of the most intriguing chapters in the book is the one titled Secrets. Thiel argues that every valuable company is built on a secret that nobody else knows.
Yeah, it's this fascinating idea that there's still hidden knowledge out there waiting to be discovered.
And that those discoveries can lead to massive breakthroughs.
Exactly. He poses this question: what valuable company is nobody building? And he says the answer is always a secret.
Okay.
Something important and unknown, something hard but doable. If there are still secrets left, there are likely many world-changing companies yet to be started.
So it's like this treasure hunt for hidden knowledge.
Yeah, in a way. And he talks about this societal shift where we've almost lost our belief in the existence of secrets.
Really?
Yeah, like we think everything's already been figured out.
And there's nothing new under the sun.
Exactly. He points to things like the Unabomber's disillusionment with technology and the hipster trend of embracing the past.
As signs of this loss of faith in the future.
Precisely. And he also discusses social trends like the increasing focus on incrementalism in education.
Like just learning the established facts and methods.
Yeah, and a general risk aversion that discourages the pursuit of truly novel ideas.
So it's like we've become too complacent, too afraid to venture into the unknown.
Yeah, and he argues that this disbelief in secrets has actually had some real-world consequences.
Like what?
Well, he points to the financial bubbles as a prime example.
Mm-hmm.
He says the existence of bubbles proves that markets aren't always rational or efficient.
And that there are often hidden truths that the prevailing wisdom ignores.
Exactly. Like, everyone thought the housing market would just keep going up, but there were underlying secrets that eventually led to the crash.
Right, those cracks in the foundation that no one wanted to see.
And he contrasts this with companies like Airbnb and Uberlyft, which were built on what he calls open but unsuspected secrets.
Like the untapped potential of spare rooms in private cars.
Exactly. Things that were right there in front of us, but that most people just didn't see as opportunities.
He even suggests that secrets about people are often underappreciated. Like those unspoken truths or forbidden topics.
Yeah, things that we're not supposed to talk about, but that might actually hold the key to some major breakthroughs.
So it's like we need to be willing to challenge those social taboos and dig deeper.
Absolutely. And he connects this back to the idea of monopoly by pointing out that monopolists often downplay their dominance.
To avoid scrutiny.
Exactly. While competitive firms tend to exaggerate their uniqueness.
So it's like this game of smoke and mirrors.
Yeah, and Thiel's point is that the real differences are often hidden beneath the surface.
So you have to be willing to look beyond the marketing and the hype.
Precisely. You need to find those underlying secrets.
Okay, so you've found a secret. You've got this Potentially groundbreaking idea.
Yeah.
What's next?
Right, and this is where Thiel talks about the importance of foundations.
Okay, setting the stage for success.
Exactly. And this is where he lays down what he calls Thiel's law.
Which is?
A startup messed up at its foundation cannot be fixed.
Okay, so you got to get it right from the start.
Absolutely. He stresses that the very beginning of a company is qualitatively different from any other stage.
And it sets the tone for everything that follows.
Precisely. So you can't just slap together a foundation and think you'll fix it later.
Right, you got to be deliberate and thoughtful from day one.
And the first and most crucial decision, according to Thiel, is choosing your co-founder.
Yeah, that makes sense. You're going to be spending a lot of time together.
A lot of time going through a lot of ups and downs.
You got to be on the same page.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He even compares it to getting married.
Wow, that's serious, huh?
He says it's that important, and he warns about the potential for founder conflict to completely destroy a company.
Yeah, I can see how that would happen.
So he really emphasizes the importance of co-founders having a shared history and understanding before starting a venture together.
Rather than just meeting at a networking event and deciding to jump in.
Right. You need that pre-existing bond, that trust.
Now, beyond the founders themselves, he also talks about the need for alignment throughout the company.
Mm-hmm.
Even though he acknowledges that there are always going to be tensions between, like, owners, managers, and employees.
Absolutely. But he argues that a clear structure is necessary to maintain that long-term alignment.
Okay, so everyone needs to be pulling in the same direction.
Exactly. He even uses the DMV as an extreme example of what happens with severe misalignment.
Yeah, the DMV is notorious for its bureaucracy.
It is, and that's a direct result of everyone having different incentives and priorities.
Okay, so alignment is key.
It's absolutely crucial. And along those lines, he also stresses that everyone involved in the company should be full-time and properly compensated.
So everyone feels valued and invested in the success of the company.
Exactly. And when it comes to compensation, he has some pretty strong views, particularly about CEO pay.
Okay, what's his take on that?
Well, he argues that a company actually does better the less it pays its CEO, especially in the early stages. Yeah, he suggests a cap of around $150,000 for a venture-backed startup CEO.
Wow, that's a lot lower than what many CEOs make.
It is, but his argument is that high pay can actually incentivize the CEO to defend the status quo.
Instead of being willing to take risks and really push for growth.
Exactly. He also highlights the value of equity over high cash compensation for long-term alignment.
Okay, so giving the CEO a stake in the company's future success.
Precisely. And the allocation of that equity is critical too, and something he suggests keeping secret within the company.
Okay, why is that?
Well, he argues that distributing equity equally can seem arbitrary,
Mm-hmm.
while granting different amounts up front can breed resentment.
Right, it's a delicate balance.
It is. And since achieving perfect fairness is impossible, keeping the specifics private can actually prevent unnecessary conflict.
Okay, so transparency isn't always the best policy.
Not necessarily, at least not in this case.
So you've got your foundation, your team, your compensation structure. Then Thiel moves on to what he calls the mechanics of mafia, which is all about company culture.
Yeah, that's a pretty memorable chapter title.
It is. So what's he getting at there?
Well, it refers to the PayPal Mafia,
Mm-hmm.
which was this group of former PayPal employees who went on to found and invest in numerous other successful tech companies.
Like Elon Musk, Peter Thiel himself, Reid Hoffman.
Exactly. A whole bunch of really successful entrepreneurs came out of that early PayPal team.
And Thiel argues that a key factor in their success was the strong company culture they built at PayPal.
Yeah, he describes a good company culture as a team of people on a mission on the inside.
So it's about more than just individual talent.
Absolutely. It's about that shared sense of purpose, that feeling of camaraderie.
And he emphasizes hiring people who genuinely enjoy working together, not just assembling a collection of talented individuals.
Precisely. He contrasts the more transactional relationships